What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. And today, we want to take a deeper look at one of the prospects that we mentioned in yesterday's episode. Now, if you missed yesterday's episode, we talked about some of the standout performers at the Senior Bowl, and among them was Arizona offensive lineman Jonah Savania, a player that Alex quickly identified as being a perfect target for the New York Giants, and in today's episode, we're going to dive into why we feel that's the case. Savania is a versatile prospect. He has experience playing left tackle and right tackle, but at the Senior Bowl this week, he primarily was playing right guard, and he was dominating nearly every single rep throughout these practices. So we want to talk about Jonah Savania, why he makes sense for the New York Giants, potentially as a day 2 pick, and also more generally speaking, why the Giants should consider taking an offensive lineman on day 2, continuing to add some talent to that unit since it's not a very strong one for the Giants, and also just because this draft class has a few gems in those middle rounds on the offensive line. So we're going to go ahead and dive into Jonah Savania and talk about the offensive line, but before we do, Alex, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing good, man. And yeah, yesterday we had a couple of really good discussions on some up-and-coming talent that at the Senior Bowl, obviously a lot of people in the comments suggesting, well, the Giants got Daniel Jones at the Senior Bowl. They saw a lot of guys they like who haven't panned out. And yeah, I agree with you. The Giants have been very reliant on the Senior Bowl, and it really hasn't worked in their favor. And we've pointed out some players in the past that ended up becoming very solid. The Giants obviously passed on them. But this time around, if the Giants are going to take a quarterback in the first round, 3rd overall, they need to reassure that they have a good offensive line, and they have to make sure that that quarterback is well protected in pass protection, because otherwise we're going to see a similar trend to Daniel Jones, where he got happy feet. He wasn't able to really find consistency and developed a lot of bad habits because of it, whether poor pocket presence, getting rid of the ball at the wrong times, the timing of his routes, and obviously the passing game was completely off schedule. The Giants need consistency in these areas, and right now, they don't have that. But I have a couple solutions for you guys. Don't worry. And I think that, for the most part, this is going to be a pretty interesting episode where we find a way to piece together the offensive line with some versatile talent, but also cost-efficient talent. And in this specific episode, we're going to start out talking about the Arizona offensive lineman that Anthony mentioned, Jonah Savania. And this is a really, really interesting prospect because, as we talked about yesterday, if you didn't watch that episode or missed it, that portion of it, Savania is a really, really cool player. 6'5", 336 pounds. He's a big boy, but he's got a really good anchor, and he has a lot of experience at multiple spots. He played 345 snaps at left tackle last year and 364 at right tackle. In 2023, he played 693 at right tackle, 195 at right guard, and then 2022, his first year in college, he played 790 at right guard. So he's actually the most experienced at right tackle, but right behind that is right guard, and the Giants need a right guard right now with Jermaine Illuminor holding down that RT spot, who we love a lot. Really great value grab last year. So, looking at the free agent signings, John Runyan, solid player. Obviously, JMS struggled. They lost Andrew Thomas. Can't really blame Runyan for having a lot of inconsistency around him. And then Greg Van Roten was decent, but he's a backup level player. I would still bring him back on a cheap contract, minimum deal, to be a depth piece, because I do think the Giants need more of those. And Greg Van Roten can fill a couple of gaps for you when need be if anyone gets hurt. Savania, on the other hand, is your plug-and-play right guard, and he might even be able to, this is not how I would approach it, but if he struggles at right guard, you may even want to test him at right tackle once Jermaine Illuminor's contract expires. So you have a backup plan built into place in case he does struggle at right guard. You have another position you can move him to, worst case scenario. But I do think he's going to be a solid right guard, because if you watch his footwork at the Senior Bowl, it's excellent. He has a really good anchor. He has really good leverage, and his hands, fantastic. I loved everything I saw from him in his 1v1 drills. Those are oftentimes the most difficult drills for offensive linemen, because you're like a cornerback. You don't know what the pass rusher is going to do. You don't know what moves they're going to pull. You have to be able to predict these things and understand what's going to happen and how to use leverage. He did that really, really well. So I thought he had a great couple days of practice. I know that's not the end-all, be-all. It's just the kind of start of it. But Anthony, you mentioned something really, really important for the context of Jonah Savania. Yesterday during the podcast, he had 4 sacks last year. 3 of those sacks came when he was playing left tackle. And then the fourth one actually came when he was playing, he actually, in the same game, played 17 at left tackle and then 49 reps at right tackle. So it could have been on either side, but most of his pressures and sacks came when he was playing offensive tackle. However, when he was playing guard, he didn't give up any sacks. A couple pressures here and there, but nothing crazy. He was one of the best graded pass blockers at guard in college football last season. He has 3 years of starting experience, and he's had a pretty nice string of health too. So I do like that about him. Versatility, really good pass protection, really good anchor, really good hands, solid footwork. If you're Chris Snee, who's there watching him, that's a guy I think the Giants might fall in love with as a round 2 option if he ends up available. And the Giants take a quarterback 3rd overall. Savania is a guy I'd be licking my chops about getting to the podium quickly and making sure we secure a nice long-term, cost-efficient piece to solve a critical need for us at right guard.
Yeah, and I really like what you mentioned there about kind of the similarities between Jonah Savania and Jermaine Illuminor. Something that I mentioned in yesterday's episode, because with Illuminor, you're talking about a guy who kind of came into the league as a guard/tackle, and now he's the starting right tackle for the New York Giants. However, if the Giants make an upgrade at right tackle this offseason, where is Jermaine Illuminor going to go? Well, he's going to start and be an upgrade for us at right guard. And Jonah Savania could have a pretty similar career track where he is this 6'5", slightly undersized tackle who probably is better suited for the guard spot, but can play inside and outside, has experience doing both. And as you mentioned, there is a clear connection between him playing on the left side of the line versus the right side of the line and where his sacks came from, so the sacks surrendered at least. So I think that his best position is on the right side of the line. The stats indicate that's where he's more comfortable. And also, Alex, that is where he played the majority of his career snaps. So in 2022, he had 790 snaps at right guard, 195 in 2023 at right guard, then moved to right tackle for 693 snaps in 2023, then split his time 345 snaps at left tackle, 364 snaps at right tackle in 2024. So starting out as a right guard, moving to right tackle, and then moving to left and right tackle. Guy's played almost everywhere. He's got the experience, and he knows the fundamentals and technique for both interior offensive line play and on the edge. So I think that this is a player who is very adaptive, and I think he's a guy that the New York Giants would love to have. And as you mentioned, with Illuminor being in the final year of his contract, maybe Savania starts out at guard, and then after a year, they try him at tackle. If it doesn't work, well, you got to bring in another tackle, but at least he has the ability to do both. You know that already from his career profile. So I really like him as a prospect. I think he's impressive. And I just also generally like the idea of the New York Giants prioritizing offensive line in the draft this year, because last year's draft had a lot of good offensive linemen, Alex. If you look around the league, there were a bunch of legitimate starters who plugged in day one from last year's NFL draft class on the offensive line. And how many offensive linemen did the New York Giants draft last year? 0. So they missed out on a really good draft class. This time around, it's not as strong as it was last year across the board in this draft class. No position is necessarily that much better than it was last year, a few of them. But offensive line is one of the position groups that there are some gems. And if the New York Giants want to hit on their draft picks, you want to target the strong points of the draft class. And offensive line having some strengths in that class, go ahead and take an offensive lineman. So, Alex, what's your idea on that? Obviously, we really like Savania, and we kind of just broke him down and gave a little bit of a scouting report on him. We like his versatility, and we like his upside. Yes, he's undersized for the tackle position, but really has the perfect size for the guard position and has the power to compete at that position. But outside of Savania, I know we haven't really dived into a lot of the offensive linemen in this draft class, but let's speak more generally about the New York Giants prioritizing offensive line. We've talked about how they need more veterans in the room. At least that was the case last year. So they went out and they brought in John Runyon, and they brought in Jermaine Illuminor. I know one veteran that you've mentioned is Patrick McCarry. He seems like a really great plug-and-play backup/fringe starter. But what do you think about the Giants, rather than focusing on veteran experience this year? Have to keep in mind, John Michael Schmitz is now in his 3rd year, so technically he's a veteran. Obviously, Andrew Thomas is a veteran, Illuminor is a veteran, and Runyon's a veteran. This offensive line is mostly comprised of veterans now. Maybe it's time to get back into the draft and target some offensive linemen there for some long-term prospect development on the New York Giants offensive line. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I absolutely think that's a necessity. But the difference between veterans and young draft prospects is that you have to develop prospects. And the Giants have proven difficult when it comes to that specific variable of their progress. And I do think Carmen Bracilla will have its chance to get a guy that he can develop. I think Chris Nee is targeting prospects that have a legitimate upside. And I think that Savania is one of those guys. I actually think that I would go out and I would draft Savania in the second round, and I would sign Patrick McCarry to a contract because now, and I just let Greg Van Roten walk into the sunset in that case because now you have two guys who can compete. The reality of the NFL, guys, is you want good players competing for starting jobs because that means you have really good depth, right? The Giants going out and drafting a second round guard, you expect him to play. But Jermaine Illuminor is also going to be a free agent after this year, so you don't need him to play. The Giants have been in a cycle, and Anthony, you've pointed this out many times. They've been in a cycle where we are drafting players to play immediately, all the time, in the mid to late rounds even. We drafted a running back in Tyrone Tracy, and he started most of the games this year. You know what I mean? Like, we're drafting guys in the fourth, third rounds, like, how about Andrew Phillips? In a perfect world, you draft a third-round pick to sit and learn and then take over, not to start immediately. Guys, people even do that in the first round. You know what I mean? So the Giants have been trying to plug critical needs with low probability hits in the draft. They got very lucky last year, extremely lucky that a lot of those guys panned out and actually, played a lot. But, we've seen them take steps back in year two. So I need to see that, reality happen. I know you're trying to say something.
Yeah, I want to dive in and say they did get lucky. You're right. Like Drew Phillips playing as well as he did, but their luck also ran out. Tyler Nubin got injured because he played a ridiculous amount of snaps as a rookie. Theo Johnson got injured because he played a ridiculous amount of snaps as a rookie. So did Drew Phillips, as you just mentioned. Even Malik Neighbors received a ridiculous amount of volume for a rookie wide receiver. Historic year. He's phenomenal. He deserved the workload that he got. He was banged up throughout the year because of the workload that he got, because the New York Giants were relying on first-year players to do a lot of the heavy lifting for them. That in and of itself is bad practice, and that's bad roster construction. And I understand why the Giants had to do it. Their roster was bad. They needed these guys to step in and play from day one. And thankfully, they drafted some really high character guys with a lot of talent. So they did hit on those picks, and they did get lucky. But that luck does run out, and you can't assume that every draft pick you make is going to play from day one at a solid starting level. That's why the New York Giants do need to start taking some players who have developmental qualities that can sit, learn, and eventually take over. But honestly, Alex, you know what this is? This is a problem of free agency. The New York Giants need to do a better job of filling out their roster through free agency, and that doesn't mean splashing with a Brian Burns who soaks up $30 million on your salary cap, on your salaries. That doesn't mean splashing with a John Runyon at $10 million. It doesn't mean making splash signings to make your team more top heavy. It means making more calculated signings and additions to your roster that fill out all of your needs for smaller price points in free agency, so that you can then draft for best player available and have these young guys sit, learn, and then take over. So rather than signing a 31-year-old Stephon Diggs to $15 million a year, go on the cheaper end and then draft a wide receiver and mix those two guys in until the rookie then exceeds the older veteran's talent level and takes over as a full-time starter. That's what I would like to see the New York Giants do this offseason, and that would open up the opportunity for them to draft mid-round offensive linemen like a Jonah Savania, where he doesn't have to go ahead and start immediately. They should sign an adequate starting right guard, Alex, and draft Jonah Savania, because they shouldn't be drafting for need and drafting for day one starters. They should be filling in those day one starters through free agency and then drafting the best players available. That's going to be my take. It's always been my take, and I really hope that the New York Giants learn that this time around. I know they had some success drafting for need last year, but seriously, I don't want to see these young, promising players continue to get injured because they're playing a crazy amount of snaps, or some of them be busts. I mean, when they drafted Evan Neal, they didn't do anything to actually add talent at right tackle other than Evan Neal. He was thrown into the fire from day one. Perhaps he really could have benefited from sitting for the first 5 weeks of the season and then taking over. Who knows how things would be for Evan Neal at that point? Probably not good because he's a pretty bad player, but still, you understand my point. It's good to have some actual legitimate starters brought into this team through free agency, patch up the entire roster, rather than just making those big splash signings that make your roster so top heavy. I'd like to see the Giants roster become complete, more built in a more complete fashion. That way you can take some of these young guys, let them grow, let them develop, and eventually take over as starters. So just wanted to kind of jump on there and agree with your points.
Yep, and I think that's exactly what I would like the Giants to do as well, which is why I do believe they should go out, draft Savania in the second round, and sign Patrick McCarry in free agency, because it gives them that reassurance to say, all right, if someone gets hurt, we have multiple depth pieces that can step in and play at a competent level. You know what I mean? Like Makari, he's not going to get some massive deal, and he's only 27 years old, and he's coming from the Ravens. Those two things are exactly what you want if you're the Giants. He's coming from a winning organization, right? A consistent organization, and he's only 27 years old, so he's just entering his prime physically. Those are the two variables I'm looking at if I'm the Giants. I'm saying I'll overpay a little bit for that. And Makari has experience similar to Savania. He has 685 snaps at left tackle, so he can step in and fill that role if need be. Did pretty well in that regards. If anything happens to Andrew Thomas, you have a backup plan there. You had 955 snaps last season at left guard, where he's a pretty solid pass protector. So if anything, and he played 1,100 snaps, by the way. If anything happens to John Runyon, you have a backup plan there. He's played 918 snaps at center in his career. If anything happens to JMS, or if he just sucks, you could play him there. And Savania could play right guard for you. He has 272 snaps at right guard and 1,200 at right tackle. So if anything happens to Illuminor, you have insurance there as well. That type of value, that's what the Giants need. You know what I mean? Yeah, I would love to get a Trey Smith to play right guard, but he's going to cost you $22+ million. The Giants don't have the money, guys. So unless Joe Shane's willing to backload contracts, and I don't think he's going to do it for a player like that. The truth is they need value, and they need guys with versatility right now to help stifle any problems that may pop up in injury categories. So, Makari's a really good option for the Giants. So is Savania. I would get both of them. Make sure your offensive line is above average in 2025 and 26 so that your young quarterback doesn't end up developing bad habits like drifting back in the pocket or making bad decisions because they're under pressure. If you want the one-way ticket to ruining a quarterback, it's having a bad offensive line. The Giants cannot afford to ruin a young quarterback. They have to heavily invest. I would rather invest more in the offensive line than receiver and take a receiver in the third round if that's the case. Or take a shot on a guy coming off of injury that's not going to be that expensive to play WR2. They've already shown they want to feed Malik Neighbors. You can get a good receiver in the third round, or you go DT in the third round, whatever it might be. Maybe you trade for a guy. I know you love Alec Pierce. That's someone I would absolutely consider. He has one more year left on his deal. You have a ton of money next year. I think I would maybe consider going and trying to give a mid-round pick, maybe a fourth or a fifth for Alec Pierce, who obviously maybe the Colts don't want to pay him down the low road. I don't know exactly what that kind of deal would look like. I'm just throwing out numbers. But that's kind of what I would do. I would go get some really nice versatility in Savania and Makari on the offensive line. They would immediately give you a very solid foundation to build off of because of their ability to play multiple spots. And then I'd use some money, whatever money left over, you have to get a bridge quarterback, and you can get a receiver on a deal that maybe it's a 1-year deal with an injured guy like a Stephon Diggs, whatever. And you could take that bridge quarterback, you front load those contracts. Maybe it's 1-year deals, and then you take whatever. Like a Makari, for example, and you sign into a 3-year contract. He's only 27, and you backload the cap hits to the second and third year. That's kind of how I would go about this offseason because you have to address the OL. Like, if they don't, it's a fireable offense. You know what I mean? Like, it's straight up a fireable offense. So that's kind of how I see it. They got to prepare to give this rookie quarterback everything, every chance to succeed, because if they don't, it's their jobs on the line, in my opinion.
I totally agree. I do think jobs are on the line this offseason. I think we all agree with that. This is a do-or-die year for the New York Giants in many respects, especially for general manager Joe Shane and head coach Brian Daboll. But I'm very intrigued to see what the Giants' draft strategy is, Alex. And the last thing that I want to mention here, it's a little bit off topic for this episode, but you and I were texting yesterday just about the draft class in general. I was watching the Rich Eisen show, since I watch that show religiously at this point. Todd McShay was on there, and he said this is the best running back draft class that he's seen in 25 years of scouting. So I want to open up that question here just as a brief one that we can kind of discuss before we close out. Running backs. The New York Giants have one. In fact, they have two. Devin Singletary is a starter, and so is Tyrone Tracy Jr. Should they draft a running back anyway, knowing that this draft class is among the best that many scouts have ever seen at the position? In my opinion, yeah, take a late round flyer on one and see if you hit the same way they did with Tyrone Tracy Jr. this past season. I think that's a really good idea. I think that's good practice in general to throw darts at the board at the strongest position groups in each draft class. And considering there are scouts and analysts saying this is one of the best running back draft classes ever, I think the Giants would be remiss if they didn't take a chance in the middle to later rounds on a running back, despite the fact that they have talent at the running back position. You can't have enough talent at any position in the NFL, in my opinion. Injuries happen, trades, disgruntlement. There's so much that happens over the course of a season. Why not stack talent even if it is at one of your best positions? And this kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier, Alex. Don't just draft for need. Don't just draft a cornerback in the 6th round because you need a cornerback. He's probably not any good. Draft the best player available who actually might contribute to your team. Maybe not this year, maybe 3 years down the line, but you'll reap the benefits if you draft the best player available. Keep in mind, I think we always bring this example up, Alex. The Detroit Lions went out there, spent big money on David Montgomery. Okay, running back position solves? No, still went out and got Jahmyr Gibbs. Look at what happened for them. Jahmyr Gibbs stepped in when David Montgomery went down, when they're both playing together. It's the best running back duo in the NFL. Stacking talent by drafting the best player available is how the best teams in the NFL rise to the top. And that's why I think, even though the New York Giants have a good running back room, since this draft class is so strong at that position, I would like to see if the board aligns, if the best player available in one of those middle rounds is a running back, I would like to see them go BPA, take another flyer on a running back, and potentially form a really solid duo in the running back room with Tyrone Tracy Jr. and whichever rookie they potentially draft.
I'm 100% on board with that because Singletary, that was a bad contract in hindsight. And I think that if you think you can replace running back production in the draft, they probably shouldn't have signed Singletary to begin with, and that's kind of what we learned afterward based on the conversations that we saw in Hard Knocks. So I do think that when Singletary's contract is over, I think Eric Gray's going to get cut, by the way. I think Eric Gray's time on the team is done. They've been trying to force him to be a punt returner and a kick returner. The dude fumbles every time he touches the ball. Unfortunately, it's just, you got to produce a running back these days. There's so many. And in a good draft class, I'm taking one of the mid rounds and I'm stashing him at RB3. And Singletary, yeah, he'll be your RB2 next season. No problem with that. That RB3, learn, soak into the information, learn the offense, get your reps when the opportunity comes. Injuries happen all the time to running backs. The chances will come. And when they do, be ready to take advantage. And I'm 100% down to take an RB in the 5th or 6th round. Every single year. Just take shots on them. Maybe not every single year, but I would definitely keep taking a shot on them until you find a good combination. Tracy already seems like a really good player, and that was a guy that I loved when we drafted him because low mileage. I know he wasn't great as a receiver this year, but he's clearly open. He's just dropping the passes for the most part. So, has to work on his hands. Has some fumble issues at times, but the guy's got it. He can miss tackles. He can break tackles. In the open field, he's got that extra gear. He puts it all together, man. He's going to be a dangerous player for the Giants moving forward. And I think that that's a really good sign for us. But yeah, I would love to bring another running back in because he has a very grinder type of play style. He likes the contact and stuff like that. I would like a little bit more of an athlete in terms of just speed. Someone, obviously the perfect example is Gibbs, like you mentioned, Gibbs and Montgomery. I liken Tracy to a more of a Montgomery style, not as brawly, not as looking for contact. It's a little bit more of a blend. But I liken him to a little bit more of a he likes the contact style. I'd like to find another running back that's just a speedster. He's just an athlete. You get him into space and he can take off down the sideline and just burn you for a score. That's the kind of guy I'd like to pair with Tracy. Just a pure athlete on the outside that can do other stuff for you, whether it be put him in motion, you swing him out, get him into space. Maybe a Malachi. I'm just kidding. But that's kind of how I see. He's not a speedster, obviously, Malachi Corley, but you know what I mean. I'm someone you can get in the space, let him work. So I kind of like that. If there is someone available in the late rounds that could fit that profile, someone with a specialty, I think that would be a pretty good fit for the Giants. But truth be told, there are 4 positions that the Giants need to address in this draft class, right? Quarterback, defensive tackle, offensive line, and receiver. Those 4 positions need to be, in my opinion, this class is strong for DTs, so I guarantee we'll be taking one of those in the first 4 rounds. Quarterback, obviously, we're going to be taking one of those in the first 2 rounds. We already know 2 of those 4 needs are going to be addressed. I think that, when you look at receiver, you could probably find a good one in the 3rd, maybe even the 2nd round if you wanted to go that far and they wanted to pass on the guy like Savania if he wasn't available. So I do think that there are, positions the Giants will be making sure that they solve. And a lot of them probably will be de facto BPAs anyway, so it kind of fits the mold.
True that. I think you do make a good point there. Well, actually, to more broaden your point, the Giants have needs all over the place. So if they just draft a player, they're probably drafting for need, right? The best player available is usually filling a need for this New York Giants roster. So I think you make a good point, but I would like to see the Giants try and target the strong points of the draft class. I think that makes sense. Obviously, they have to take a quarterback, and that's not a strong point of the draft class, but you're in the situation that you're in, and you got to do what you got to do for the New York Giants. So you got to take a quarterback. But outside of that, the strong points for the class, there's been a lot of buzz about how it's a really good running back class, defensive tackle class, and guard class. Take one of those players in each of those positions because, truthfully speaking, nobody on this New York Giants roster, there's maybe 3 guys who you can't upgrade over. Outside of that, everything is worth upgrading or at least trying to, or adding more talent into the position group. So we'll see how it unfolds, of course. Again, talking about some of the standouts from the Senior Bowl, I will be doing this in further detail at 6 p.m. tonight on the Bleacher Report app. So make sure you guys go check me out there every Wednesday and Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern. I am live on Bleacher Report today. I'll be talking about several standouts from the Senior Bowl that I think the New York Giants should target. So hopefully you all tune in, and I will see you there. But other than that, I think that pretty much wraps this one up. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening to Apple or Spotify, make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, we'll catch you all on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.
Perfect.